2 years living under the same roof and not even a touch. She believed she had been betrayed in the cruelest way. But that night, the millionaire fell to his knees and begged her to undress. If you enjoy love and romance stories, watch until the end, subscribe to this channel, and leave your comment saying where you're watching from. The mansion in Beacon Hill was a mausoleum of marble and glass, where two hearts once united, now beat in mismatched rhythms, echoing through the corridors like ghosts of an unfinished symphony. Emily woke every morning in the former guest room, where she had exiled herself exactly 2 years, 3 months and 17 days ago. Not that she was counting, but the body has its own memory, and each dawn brought with it the weight of that cursed night when she discovered the supposed evidence of Nathan's betrayal. The wall mirror had been removed on the second day after her discovery. Emily couldn't bear to see her own reflection, couldn't recognize the woman she had become. The French silk curtains remained drawn, transforming the room into a cozy cave where daylight had no permission to enter. It was her way of surviving, erasing, blocking, reducing, becoming invisible even to herself. All clocks in the room had been silenced. Time, that relentless executioner that insisted on moving forward even when the soul begged to stop, no longer had a voice there. Emily had created her own timeless universe, where hours dissolved into a dense fog of mechanical routine and contained pain. Still, every morning she dressed with impeccable sobriety, dark suits, hair pulled back in a severe bun, absent makeup, as if preparing her body for continuous mourning, not just for the destroyed relationship, but for the very identity she once possessed. The Emily who wore floral dresses on Sundays, who danced barefoot around the house, who laughed too loudly and loved without fear, that woman had died on that October night. On the other side of the mansion, Nathan maintained himself as an austere shadow through corridors that once knew his contagious laughter. The digital empire he had built with his own hands continued to prosper, but the glass walls of the house kept him perpetually exposed to his only and most devastating failure, the love he allowed to shatter. He worked through the night as sleep had abandoned him along with peace. The library remained lit until dawn, and the staff whispered among themselves that Mr. Bertram walked like a zombie, fulfilling tasks of an invisible position in a life that no longer belonged to him. What Emily never knew, and what Nathan carried, as a secret burden, was that he had never betrayed her. The truth was even more cruel and complex. Months before that fateful night, during a business meeting, Nathan had suffered his first attack. Sudden memory lapses, tingling in his fingers, mental confusion that left him paralyzed for long minutes. He who controlled millions with a simple movement of his eyes found himself completely powerless before his own failing body. The diagnosis came 2 weeks later, a degenerative disease in its early stage, not terminal, but progressive and relentless. The doctors were clear about the prognosis: years of gradual decline, loss of motor and cognitive abilities, increasing dependency. Nathan absorbed each word like precise stabs, not out of fear for his own deterioration, but for what it would mean for Emily. She was at the peak of her career as an art curator, receiving international invitations, building the future she had always dreamed of. How could he condemn her to a life of care and limitations? How could he be so selfish as to chain her to his decaying fate? The answer he found was cowardly, and at the same time desperately altruistic. Pushing her away through hatred would be more merciful than holding her through love. When Jessica appeared with fabricated evidence of the supposed betrayal, Nathan saw a dark and perfect opportunity. He didn't need to actively lie, only allow Emily to believe what she saw. He accepted the guilt as a shield, as a deserved punishment, as the most effective way to free her from a future he considered hopeless. But the best-intentioned plans sometimes become the cruelest prisons. 2 years had passed, and both remained trapped in the same house, breathing the same stale air of hurt and misunderstandings. Emily had never directly asked about the betrayal, and Nathan had never offered explanations. Silence had become their tacit pact, a language of its own made of avoided glances and unspoken words. It was then that the mysterious signs began to appear, like messages from a past that refused to remain buried. The first clue arrived on a Tuesday morning, when Boston's rain hammered against the mansion's windows with an almost furious insistence. Emily found the envelope slipped under her bedroom door, without identification of the sender. Only her name written in a handwriting that made her heart race before her mind could fully process the information. Inside the envelope, an old music sheet, yellowed at the edges with musical notations made by hand in faded blue ink. In the upper right corner, a dedication that made her stagger. For E, when your eyes became the pause between two measures. It was Nathan's handwriting without a doubt, but it was also a memory she had thought dead and buried forever. The E composition had been created on a winter night, 3 years before the collapse. They were in the mansion's greenhouse, among the rare orchids that Nathan cultivated as a hobby, when Emily sat at the grand piano he kept there. Her hands danced across the keys while he observed her with an intensity that made her blush, and together they created that improvised melody that became the soundtrack to one of the most intimate nights they shared. Emily held the music sheet with trembling hands, feeling the rough paper against her skin. Who could have access to that music? She herself had destroyed all copies in one of her post-separation fits of rage, tearing paper by paper until no trace remained of those moments of happiness. Or so she thought. The second clue came a week later, a book of Chilean poetry that she used to read on Sunday afternoons, discreetly left on the breakfast table. But it wasn't just any copy. It was her own book, with her personal annotations in the margins, intimate thoughts she had written in green pen, her favorite color from the time when she still allowed herself to have preferences. Flipping through the pages with a mixture of nostalgia and disturbance, Emily discovered something that left her breathless. Phrases she thought she had underlined alone now appeared highlighted with redoubled force, as if someone had traced each line with a specific intention. The love that dare not speak its name. Fear's the only one worthy of being whispered. The phrase was circled in red, a color she had never used in her annotations. Who was playing with her sanity? Who had access not only to her most intimate belongings, but also to her most secret memories? Emily began to question her own perception of reality. Was it possible that her mind, fragile from years of emotional isolation, was creating these signs as a desperate way to seek connection? The third and most disturbing clue arrived at the end of the month, a restored photograph attached with golden tape where there had once been a tear. It was an image of the two of them embracing in the mansion's garden, smiling with a genuineness that now seemed to belong to other people, to a parallel life that might never have really existed. Emily perfectly remembered tearing that photograph in half one December afternoon, symbolically separating their bodies united by the photographer's lens. She had kept only her own half, throwing Nathan's part in the trash with a dramatic gesture that would later embarrass her. Now someone had not only recovered the pieces, but reunited them with an artisanal care that suggested devotion, not play. These discoveries began to modify Emily's meticulously constructed routine. She found herself wandering the mansion during the early hours, looking for traces of herself, for clues about who was orchestrating this strange game of memories. She began to observe Nathan from afar, studying his movements, trying to decipher if he could be responsible for these apparitions from the past. But Nathan seemed as lost as she was, perhaps even more so. During these nocturnal vigils, Emily caught him walking the corridors like a sleepwalker, or standing before windows for hours on end, looking at the garden with an expression of longing so intense it became physical. It was during one of these nights of mutual and silent observation that Emily noticed something different in Nathan's routine. He had begun to frequent the abandoned greenhouse, that space both had avoided since the separation, because it was too loaded with happy memories. Weak lights came from there during the early morning hours, and Emily could hear strange sounds, as if someone was moving pots, working the soil, caring for plants. Curiosity began to erode the caution she had built as armor. Who was resurrecting the dead memories of their relationship? And why? Emily didn't know yet, but a certainty was beginning to form in her chest. Someone knew her most intimate secrets, her deepest wounds, and was using that knowledge for some purpose she still couldn't understand. What she didn't imagine was that this someone had a name, a face, and a shared history that went far beyond the broken marriage with Nathan. Jessica's name began to circulate through the mansion like a ghost deciding to materialize after years of absence. First it was the staff, whispering about an elegant woman who had appeared at the gate asking for Emily. Then it was Mrs. Martinez herself, the housekeeper, who discreetly mentioned seeing that blonde lady from the old days prowling the block, in a black Porsche. Emily felt her stomach tighten upon hearing the name. Jessica Montgomery had been much more than a simple partner to Nathan in the early years of the technology company. She had been confidant, business partner, and for a period Emily preferred not to remember, had also been her intimate friend. Dangerously intimate. The history between them was a chapter that Emily had locked away in the mental file of forbidden subjects. They met at a corporate party when Emily was still building her career as a curator, and Jessica was the brilliant mind behind the marketing strategies of Nathan's company. There was an instant chemistry between them, a connection that transcended conventional categories of friendship or professional interest. For months, they became inseparable. Dinners that extended into the early morning, conversations about art and business that drifted into personal confessions, entire afternoons lost in museums and galleries where Jessica absorbed every word from Emily about composition, light, and meaning. There was an intensity in that friendship that bothered even Emily, accustomed to more measured and predictable relationships. The night that changed everything happened during a vernissage at the MFA. Emily had drunk more wine than usual, celebrating an important acquisition for the collection she curated. Jessica was radiant, talking about a new project that would revolutionize how people consumed digital art. They left together, laughing loudly on Commonwealth Avenue, when Jessica suggested extending the night at her apartment in Back Bay. It was there, among abstract paintings and a contemporary jazz playlist, that Jessica approached Emily in a way that didn't allow for ambiguous interpretations. The kiss happened before either could rationalize the moment. It was intense, desperate, charged with a passion that Emily didn't know existed within her. But by dawn, guilt arrived like an emotional hangover. Emily was beginning to get seriously involved with Nathan, and that night with Jessica represented a betrayal not only of the feeling she was developing for him, but also of the image she had of herself. She fled the apartment like a criminal, leaving Jessica sleeping among tangled sheets and unfulfilled promises. In the following weeks, Emily gradually distanced herself from Jessica, using her growing relationship with Nathan as an excuse and shield. But Jessica didn't passively accept the distancing. The insistent calls began, the declined invitations, the looks laden with hurt during social events where they inevitably met. The situation reached its peak when Emily and Nathan announced their engagement. Jessica appeared at the celebration party wearing a red dress that was simultaneously elegant and provocative, and spent the entire night circulating among the guests with a smile that Emily recognized as dangerous. At the end of the night, she approached the couple and, looking directly into Emily's eyes, said, "I hope you'll be very happy, especially you, Emily. You deserve to have everything you want, even if you don't know what that is yet." After the wedding, Jessica completely disappeared from the couple's social circle. She sold her share of the company to Nathan, moved abroad supposedly to expand her business, and for 2 years lived as an uncomfortable memory that Emily managed to push to the back of her consciousness. Now her ghostly presence was back, and Emily couldn't avoid the feeling that Jessica's reappearance was connected with the strange clues she had been receiving. Was it possible that she was responsible for the music sheets, the annotated books, the restored photographs? And if so, what was the purpose behind this calculated resurrection of the past? The answer came on a Thursday afternoon when Emily decided to leave the mansion for the first time in weeks. She was walking along Newbury Street, trying to reconnect with the life that existed beyond the walls of her voluntary prison, when she felt a familiar presence. She turned and there was Jessica, more beautiful than ever, wearing a white blazer that enhanced the tan probably acquired on some European beach. "Emily," she said, approaching with a smile that was both warm and calculating. What a wonderful coincidence, or perhaps it's no coincidence at all. Emily felt the ground move beneath her feet. 2 decades of adult life, years of therapy, months of emotional isolation, and yet the simple presence of Jessica managed to unbalance her as if she were again a confused young woman discovering unknown facets of her own sexuality. "Jessica," she managed to respond, hating how fragile her voice sounded. "You're back." "I never really left," Jessica replied, her green eyes shining with an intensity that Emily recognized all too well. "I was just waiting for the right moment for our conversation, and that moment, dear Emily, has arrived." The cafe where Jessica led her was hidden in an underground gallery in Cambridge, one of those intimate places that exist for conversations that cannot be heard by curious ears. Emily sat in the burgundy velvet armchair, feeling like an actress who forgot her lines at the crucial moment of the play. Jessica ordered 2 espressos and settled in with the feline elegance that had always characterized her, crossing her legs in a way that was simultaneously natural and studied. "You look different," Jessica observed, her eyes traveling over Emily's, face with an intimacy that made her skin tingle. "Thinner, eyes more sunken. The marriage isn't doing you well from what I see." Emily swallowed hard, trying to maintain the composure she had learned to use as armor in recent years. "I didn't come here to talk about my marriage. I came because I need to know if you have anything to do with certain things that have been happening." A slow smile spread across Jessica's lips, and Emily immediately recognized that expression. It was the smile she used when she held all the cards and knew exactly how to play them. "Certain things? How mysterious you are, Emily. Always like that, right? Speaking in riddles when you feel cornered." The music sheets, the books, the photographs. Emily tried to keep her voice steady, but there was a growing urgency in her words. "Someone is messing with me, playing with my memories, and I have the impression you know who it is." Jessica laughed, a low and musical sound that echoed off the walls of the nearly empty cafe. Always so direct when desperate, it was like, that night in my apartment too. You reached the breaking point and then exploded in sincerity." Blood rushed to Emily's face like a wave of heat. "We're not going to talk about that." "Why not? It was the most honest night of your life, the only time you allowed yourself to feel without filters, without that British restraint you wear like a second skin." Jessica leaned forward, decreasing the distance between them. "Do you remember what you said to me that early morning? Between one kiss and another, when you thought I was asleep?" Emily closed her eyes, trying to block the memories that came as disconnected flashes. She did remember, yes. She remembered whispering confessions in Jessica's ear, words she had never said to anyone, not even to herself, about her fantasies, her fears, her unexplored curiosities about her own body and her own desires. "You said you were afraid of being too happy with Nathan," Jessica continued, her voice low and hypnotic. "That you were afraid happiness would be temporary, and that you wouldn't know how to deal with the loss when it came. You said with me, you felt safe to be imperfect." "Stop," Emily asked, but her voice came out more like a whisper than a command. "You also said you had never felt desire for a woman before, but with me it was different. That I awakened a part of you that you didn't know existed. And then when I woke up in the morning, you were gone. No explanation, no conversation. Like a thief who steals a moment and runs away with it." Jessica's words were like precise blades, cutting through the defenses Emily had built over the years. Each phrase resurrected sensations she had deeply buried, sensory memories that came accompanied by warmth, perfume, the texture of skin against skin. "Yes," Jessica said suddenly, answering a question Emily hadn't asked aloud. "It was me. The music sheets, the books, the photographs. It was all me." Emily opened her eyes and found Jessica's gaze fixed on hers, without any attempt to hide the intensity that had always existed between them. "Why?" "Because you took him from me. And from myself." Jessica's voice was loaded with an old pain, but also with an anger that had transformed into determination over the years. "When you chose Nathan, You didn't just reject what we had. You erased it, pretended it never happened, and I was left with the impression that I had dreamed it all. Emily felt a wave of guilt mixed with anger. I was confused. It was all very new, very intense. I didn't know how to handle it. So you ran away and married him as if I were a nightmare you had woken up from. Jessica leaned back in her armchair, but her eyes didn't leave Emily's for even a second. Do you want to know the truth, Emily? The truth about your perfect marriage? Something in Jessica's tone made Emily's stomach contract. What do you mean? I created the evidence of the betrayal. The messages, the photographs, the perfume on the sheets. It was all fabricated by me. Jessica spoke with a calm that made the confession even more devastating. Nathan never betrayed you. He didn't even know what was happening when you confronted him with the evidence. Emily's world stopped spinning. Jessica's words echoed in her mind like distorted echoes in a deep cave. 2 years of pain, isolation, carefully cultivated resentment, all based on a lie orchestrated by the woman now sitting before her with a sad but determined smile. Why? Emily's voice came out broken, almost inaudible. For revenge, initially. Because if I couldn't have you, at least I could destroy the happiness you chose instead of ours. Jessica sighed deeply. But then I realized it wasn't just revenge. It was jealousy, of a love that didn't choose me, of a woman who dared to erase a piece of her past where I still existed. Emily abruptly stood up, knocking over the coffee cup she hadn't even touched. The dark liquid spread across the table like a growing stain, mirroring the chaos she felt inside. Emily left the cafe like a sleepwalker, Jessica's words echoing in her mind in a chaotic symphony of devastating revelations. The streets of Cambridge seemed unreal, as if she were walking through a blurred painting where colors mixed without making sense. Nathan had not betrayed her. 2 years of self-imposed pain, emotional isolation, carefully cultivated resentment, all based on an elaborately constructed lie. Boston's traffic roared around her as she waited for a taxi, but Emily could barely process the sounds of the city. Her mind was caught in a spiral of recontextualized memories. Nathan's expression, that terrible night when she confronted him with the false evidence. He hadn't denied the accusations, but he hadn't confirmed them either. He had just remained silent, with that expression of defeat she had interpreted as guilt, but now recognized as something very different. During the entire trip back to the mansion, Emily tried to reconstruct the events of that fateful night. She had found the messages on Nathan's phone, intimate conversations with a woman who identified herself only as Jay. The photographs were convincing. Nathan entering and leaving a hotel, always accompanied by a female figure whose face never appeared clearly. And there was the perfume, that floral fragrance that had permeated the sheets of the couple's bed one afternoon when she returned unexpectedly from a business trip. Now, with Jessica's confession still burning in her ears, Emily understood the diabolical perfection of the plan. Jessica intimately knew both their routines, had access to the house through Nathan back when they were partners, knew exactly which buttons to push to awaken the jealousy and insecurities that Emily had always carried. The woman in the photographs was Jessica herself, always with her back turned or her face obscured. The messages had been carefully composed to sound genuine, but vague enough not to offer details that could be contested. What most disturbed Emily was realizing how easily she had believed in the betrayal. She hadn't questioned, hadn't given Nathan a chance to explain himself. She had simply absorbed the pain, as if it were something she had always been waiting to happen, as if she unconsciously believed that she didn't deserve the happiness she had found with him. When she arrived at the mansion, the sun was already setting, tinting Boston's sky with orange hues that reflected in the windows of the house. Emily stopped in front of the gate, observing the property where she had been so happy and then so miserable. The glass greenhouse gleamed at the back of the garden, and she could see a faint light emanating from its interior. Nathan was there. She was sure of it. For the first time in 2 years, Emily didn't go directly to her exile room. Instead, she walked slowly through the garden, following the stone path that led to the greenhouse. Each step was a conscious decision, a movement toward a conversation she had avoided for too long. The greenhouse door was ajar, and Emily could hear soft sounds coming from inside, the noise of running water, the careful movement of someone working with plants. She gently pushed the door and entered the environment that had once been her favorite refuge in the house. What she saw left her breathless. The greenhouse, which she believed to be abandoned and dead, was flourishing again. The orchids that Nathan cultivated with such care were alive, some even blooming. There were new plants, species she didn't recognize, and an irrigation system that had clearly been recently installed. Nathan was kneeling before a bed of flowers, with soil on, his hands and an intense concentration on his face. He hadn't noticed her presence yet, and Emily had a few precious seconds to observe him, without the usual barriers of tension between them. He was thinner, had wrinkles around his eyes that hadn't existed before, and there was a fragility in his movements that she couldn't identify. That's when he saw her. Nathan raised his eyes and met Emily's gaze, and for a moment both remained completely still, as if any movement could break the fragile spell of that unexpected encounter. "Emily," he said, his voice hoarse from disuse. It was the first time they had spoken directly in months. "You're caring for the plants," she observed, stating the obvious because she didn't know how to begin the conversation that needed to happen. Nathan slowly stood up, cleaning his hands on a towel that was hanging on one of the greenhouse structures. "They were dying. I couldn't let them die completely." Emily looked around, absorbing the life that pulsed in the environment. "Why didn't you tell me? About the plants? About everything?" He observed her for a long moment, and Emily saw something move in his gaze, a decision being made, a barrier being lowered. "Because I thought it would be easier for you to hate me than to have to forgive me." The words hit Emily like a punch in the chest. She realized in that instant that there was much more behind Nathan's silence than she had ever imagined. There were secrets, there was pain, there were reasons she had never bothered to investigate. "Nathan," she began, feeling the words form with difficulty, "I know about Jessica. I know that you didn't, that the evidence was false." Nathan's face lost all color, and he held onto one of the greenhouse benches as if he needed physical support to process what he had just heard. "How did you—" He couldn't finish the question. "She told me today everything." Emily took a step toward him and then another, slowly diminishing the physical and emotional distance that had separated them for so long. "Why didn't you deny it? Why did you let me believe?" Nathan closed his eyes and Emily saw his hands tremble slightly. When he spoke again, his voice was loaded with a fatigue that seemed to go far beyond physical exhaustion. "Because I'm dying," said Nathan, the words leaving his mouth like stones he had carried for too long. "Not today, not tomorrow, but I'm dying, and I thought it would be easier for you to hate me than to have to watch me wither away." Emily felt the ground move beneath her feet for the second time that day. The revelations were accumulating like layers of a bitter onion she was forced to peel, each one more painful than the last. "What are you saying?" Nathan moved away from her, walking toward the piano that still occupied a corner of the greenhouse. His hands trembled slightly when they touched the keys, producing loose notes that echoed through the environment like melancholy sighs. "3 years ago, I began to have strange symptoms, memory lapses, tingling in my fingers, moments of mental confusion. At first, I thought it was stress, overwork." Emily remained motionless, hypnotized by the words Nathan spoke while looking at the piano keys, as if it were easier to tell the story to the instrument than to her. "When I finally saw a doctor, the diagnosis was most definitive: a degenerative disease, not terminal in the short term, but progressive. Years of gradual decline, loss of abilities, increasing dependency." Tears began to roll down Emily's face, before she even realized she was crying. "Why didn't you tell me I had the right to know?" "Did you?" Nathan turned to face her, and Emily saw in his eyes a pain that went far beyond the physical. "You were at the height of your career, receiving invitations from international museums, building the future you always dreamed of. How could I condemn you to a life of care and limitations? How could I be so selfish as to tie you to my fate?" "That decision wasn't yours alone to weigh," Make, Emily replied, her voice broken by emotion. We were married, I loved you. Love isn't just for the good moments. Nathan laughed, a bitter sound that didn't match the man she had known. You loved me, past tense, and when Jessica appeared with those false pieces of evidence, you believed without questioning. That told me everything I needed to know about the solidity of our relationship. His words were like slaps, but Emily recognized the cruel truth they contained. She had believed in the betrayal because deep down she always doubted she deserved a love as intense as what Nathan offered. She had spent her entire life waiting for disappointment, and when it presented itself in the form of photographic evidence, Emily embraced it almost with relief. You're right, she admitted, wiping away tears with the back of her hand. I believed because I was afraid of being too happy, afraid that everything was temporary, but that didn't give you the right to make decisions about our lives without consulting me. Nathan approached her slowly, and Emily could see up close the changes that the disease had already begun to effect in him. There was a slight instability in his movements, a hesitation that hadn't existed before. You're right, but I thought it would be an act of love, letting you free to live the life you deserved. An act of love would have been giving me the chance to choose, Emily retorted, giving me the opportunity to fight by your side, to face this together. Instead, you transformed me into a widow of a man who was still alive. The silence that followed was filled only by the soft sounds of the greenhouse, the dripping of the irrigation system, the almost imperceptible murmur of plants growing, the low hum of the equipment that maintained the controlled environment. It was a different silence from those they had shared over the last 2 years. This one was loaded with truth, not avoidance. How are you now? Emily asked, finally asking the question that mattered. The disease. How is it progressing? Nathan extended his hands toward her, and Emily could see the slight tremor that affected them. Some days are worse than others. I've lost some fine motor coordination, which is why I stopped working directly with the most complex codes. Short-term memory sometimes fails, but the doctors say I still have years ahead before the limitations become really incapacitating. Emily took his hands in hers, feeling the warm and familiar skin, but also noticing the fragility that wasn't there before. Years we could have lived together, facing this together. Emily, said Nathan, his voice loaded with a tenderness she hadn't heard in so long. It's not too late. We can still, if you want to, if you can forgive me. She interrupted him by placing her fingers on his lips. There's nothing to forgive. There's much to rebuild, much to talk about, much to decide. But forgiveness, that implies you did something wrong by loving me enough to want to protect me. Nathan closed his eyes and rested his forehead against hers, an intimate gesture they hadn't shared in an eternity. I love you, he whispered. I never stopped loving you, not for a second. I love you too, Emily replied, feeling the words come out with an ease that surprised her. But love isn't enough, Nathan. We need honesty, trust, communication. We need to learn to face problems together, not run from each other. He nodded, opening his eyes to meet hers. How do we do this? How do we rebuild something that was so damaged? Emily looked around the greenhouse, observing the plants that Nathan had saved from death, that were flourishing again under his patient care. We start slowly, like you did with these plants, one day at a time, with patience, with care. And this time, we do it together. It was then that she noticed something that had gone unnoticed before. On a small table beside the piano, there were other handwritten music sheets, all with annotations in Nathan's handwriting. They were variations of the music they had created together years ago, melodic developments he had apparently continued working on throughout the time they were separated. The discovery of the music sheets opened a new layer of understanding about the years of silence they had shared. Emily approached the table with reverence, gently touching the sheets of paper covered with Nathan's familiar handwriting. There were dozens of variations of the music they created together, each exploring a different emotion, some melancholic, others hopeful, some angry, others pleading. You continued composing, she said, more a statement than a question. Nathan joined her beside the table, his fingers running over one of the more recent sheets. "It was the only way I found to talk to you. Even if you would never hear it, I needed to continue our musical conversation. It was as if while I continued composing, a part of us was still alive." Emily picked up one of the music sheets, recognizing sections of the original melody interwoven with completely new progressions. The music had evolved, grown, become more complex and sophisticated, but maintained the emotional essence they had created together on that magical night 3 years ago. "Do you remember how it was before?" Nathan asked, sitting on the piano bench. "Before everything got complicated, before the lies and the silences. Do you remember how we were together?" Emily closed her eyes, letting the memories flow without resistance. She remembered Sunday mornings when they woke late and stayed in bed talking for hours. She remembered how Nathan would embrace her from behind while she prepared coffee, whispering silly jokes in her ear. She remembered the nights they danced through the house without music, just following the rhythm of their own synchronized hearts. "I remember," she said, opening her eyes to find Nathan observing her with an intensity that made her blush. "But we can't simply go back to who we were, Nathan. We've changed, I've changed, you've changed. We have to discover who we are now together." Nathan began to play one of the musical variations, his fingers finding the keys with a familiarity that defied the tremor caused by the disease. The music filled the greenhouse with a melancholic beauty that reminded Emily of why she had fallen in love with him in the first place. It wasn't just his appearance or his professional success. It was the way he understood the secret language of emotions and could translate it into sounds. "You know what hurt me the most in these 2 years," said Emily, sitting beside him on the piano bench. "It wasn't the supposed betrayal. It was the silence. It was feeling that you had given up on us without fighting." "I thought I was fighting," Nathan replied, his hands stopping over the keys. "I thought I was fighting for you, for your freedom, for your future. I didn't realize I was fighting against us." Emily placed her hands over his, feeling the subtle tremor that ran through his fingers. "The disease. Is it getting worse?" "Some days are worse than others. Today is a good day." Nathan intertwined his fingers with hers. "But we don't know how long the good days will last. That's why you wanted to push me away," Emily completed, "so that I wouldn't have to see you deteriorate. It's cowardly, I know. But the idea of you looking at me with pity, of having to take care of me as if I were a child." Emily interrupted him, turning on the bench to face him. "Do you really believe I'm that superficial? That my love for you depended on you being strong and independent forever?" Nathan didn't respond immediately, but Emily saw the answer in his eyes. Yes, he believed that. He believed that she wouldn't be capable of loving him through vulnerability and disease. "Nathan," she said, taking his face between her hands, "I fell in love with you not because you were perfect, but because you were real. Because when you were with me, you allowed yourself to be vulnerable. Because you cried watching bad movies and because you sang in the shower, completely out of tune. Because you were afraid of spiders and because you made a point of reading to me every night before sleep." Tears began to roll down Nathan's face, tears he had repressed through years of self-imposed solitude. "I'm so afraid," he confessed, "afraid of forgetting your face, afraid of not being able to play the piano anymore, afraid of becoming a burden." "And I'm afraid too," admitted Emily, "afraid of not being strong enough to face this, afraid of not knowing how to take care of you, afraid of losing you again. But do you know the difference between being afraid alone and being afraid together? When you're alone, fear consumes you. When you're together, fear is divided in half." They stayed like that for a long time, embracing on the piano bench, letting tears wash away years of accumulated pain. They were no longer the young and carefree couple they had been, but neither were they the wounded strangers they had become. They were something new, something that needed to be discovered and built with patience. "How do we start?" Nathan asked, his voice muffled against Emily's hair. "We start small," she answered. "We have dinner together tonight. We talk about simple things. We relearn how to be in the same room without pain, and tomorrow we take one more step." Nathan moved slightly away to look into her eyes. And if I can't? If the disease progresses faster than we expect? Emily smiled, and it was the first genuine smile she had given in years. Then we face that too, together. One day at a time, one note at a time, like the music you continued to compose when you thought I wasn't listening. Do you want to hear the complete version? He asked, indicating the music sheet spread across the table. I do, said Emily. But first I want you to teach me how to play again. My hands have forgotten how to find the right keys. Nathan positioned her hands on the keyboard, his fingers guiding hers with a tenderness that transcended physical attraction. It was intimacy, in its purest form, not the urgent desire of young bodies, but the deep connection of two souls that had chosen to find each other again after years lost in the dark. The first days of reconstruction were like learning to walk again after years of emotional paralysis. Emily moved back to the master bedroom, but they slept on opposite sides of the king-size bed, like two continents separated by an ocean of mutual caution. They talked during meals about safe subjects, her work at the museum, his projects that were now more managed by his team, Boston's weather that insisted on being unpredictable. But there were moments of unexpected grace that emerged like wildflowers in arid terrain. On the third night, Emily woke to the sound of Nathan having a nightmare. Without thinking twice, she approached and embraced him, whispering words of comfort until he relaxed in her arms. By morning, neither mentioned the episode, but something fundamental had changed. The tacit permission to care for each other had been re-established. 1 week after the reunion in the greenhouse, Emily received a call from Jessica. The voice that came from the other end of the line was different from the confident woman she had met at the cafe. It sounded small, almost fragile. Emily, I need to talk to you again. In person. We have nothing more to talk about, Jessica, Emily replied, surprising herself with the firmness in her own voice. Please, it's about me, about what I did. I need to explain better. Against better judgment, Emily agreed to meet her at the same cafe where they had talked before. This time Jessica was different. Without the impeccable makeup, wearing simple clothes, her blonde hair carelessly tied back. She looked years older and infinitely more tired. I don't expect your forgiveness, Jessica began without preamble. What I did was unforgivable. But I need you to understand that it wasn't just revenge or jealousy. It was desperation. Emily remained silent, waiting. When you rejected me, when I woke up alone in that apartment, something broke inside me. Not just my heart, but something essential about who I was. Jessica nervously played with the strap of her bag, avoiding Emily's gaze. I had never felt so complete with anyone. And suddenly you simply erased everything as if nothing had happened. I was confused, Jessica. It was all very new to me. I know, I understand that now, but at the time I felt as if you had used my body for an experiment and then discarded me. Jessica finally raised her eyes to meet Emily's. I spent years in therapy trying to process that rejection, and when I saw you two so happy, so complete, together, something in me definitively ruptured. Emily felt a complex mixture of guilt and anger. That doesn't justify what you did. You destroyed my marriage based on personal hurt. You're right, nothing justifies it. But I need you to know that I regret it every day. Not just for the 2 years of unhappiness I caused you both, but because I realized that my revenge also imprisoned me. I haven't been able to have a healthy relationship since then. I haven't been able to trust anyone, nor be trusted by anyone. Jessica paused, taking a deep breath. I came here to apologize, but also to give you something. She took a thick envelope from her bag. These are all the evidences I created against Nathan. The originals, the digital manipulations, everything. Perhaps you'll want to know exactly how it was done to fully understand the dimension of the farce. Emily took the envelope, feeling its weight in her hands. Why are you doing this now? Because I need to move forward. And you both deserve that too. Jessica stood up, leaving money on the table to pay for the coffee she had barely touched. Emily, what we experienced that night was real. It was beautiful and intense and true. But you chose Nathan, and I need to accept that. I hope you can be happy. After Jessica left, Emily remained alone at the cafe holding the envelope. Part of her wanted to open it immediately, investigate every detail of the elaborate staging that had destroyed her trust in Nathan. Another part wanted to throw it all in the trash without looking, leaving the past buried where it was. In the house, she decided to take the envelope home and open it together with Nathan. If they were going to rebuild their relationship on solid foundations, they needed to face even the most painful parts of the truth together. She found Nathan in the greenhouse, as had become his habit in the afternoons. He was pruning an orchid that had begun to bloom, his movements careful despite the tremor in his hands. When he saw her arrive with the envelope, he stopped what he was doing and focused entirely on her. "Jessica gave me this," Emily explained, telling him about the meeting and the other woman's apologies. "They're the evidences she fabricated. I thought maybe we should look together." Nathan considered for a moment. "Do you want to see?" "I don't know," Emily admitted. "Part of me wants to understand exactly how it was done. Another part thinks it will only feed the pain unnecessarily." "Then let's burn it," Nathan said simply. "Burn it. Let's make a ceremony. Burn everything without opening it, without looking, like a cleansing ritual." He approached her and took her hands. "We don't need to know the details of how we were deceived. We know we were, we know why, and we know we've chosen to move forward together. That's enough." The idea sounded perfect to Emily. That night they lit a fire in the garden of the mansion, something they hadn't done since the first years of their marriage. They sat side by side on a blanket, the envelope between them. "Are you sure?" Emily asked. "Absolutely," Nathan replied. Together they threw the envelope into the flames and watched as years of lies and pain transformed into ashes that the night wind carried away. It was then that Emily realized that true healing wasn't in understanding every detail of what had gone wrong, but in consciously choosing to build something new on the ruins of the old. 3 months after the ceremony of burning the false evidence, life in the mansion had assumed a new rhythm, slower and more deliberate. Emily and Nathan developed reconnection rituals that respected both the lost intimacy and the need to rebuild trust gradually. They had breakfast together on the porch, read in silence in the library during rainy autumn afternoons, and every night before sleep they played piano together for a few minutes, never forcing the music, just letting melodies emerge naturally from their intertwined fingers on the keys. Nathan's disease continued to progress in a slow but noticeable way. Some days he woke up with more accentuated motor difficulties or with memory lapses that left him frustrated and scared. Emily learned to recognize the signs and developed subtle ways to help him without making him feel diminished. When his hands trembled too much to hold a coffee cup firmly, she prepared his in a mug with 2 handles. When he forgot a word in the middle of a sentence, she waited patiently, offering synonyms only when he asked for help. But not everything was about the disease. There were moments of pure joy that surprised them with their intensity. One morning, Emily woke to the sound of Nathan laughing loudly in the kitchen. She went downstairs and found him trying to make pancakes, but the batter had splashed everywhere, transforming the kitchen into a culinary war zone. Instead of getting irritated with the mess, Emily grabbed a handful of flour and threw it at him, initiating a food fight that ended with both covered in pancake batter, kissing against the kitchen, counter like teenagers in love. It was in this moment that Emily realized something fundamental. She wasn't taking care of a sick man. She was living with the man she loved, who happened to have a disease. The difference might seem subtle, but it was transformative. It changed the entire dynamic of the relationship, taking the focus off the limitation and placing it on the possibility. 1. Day. Emily arrived home after a meeting at the museum and found Nathan in the greenhouse, but he wasn't caring for the plants. He was sitting on the floor, surrounded by paper boxes she didn't recognize. When she approached, she saw they were letters, hundreds of them, all written in her own handwriting. "What is this?" she asked, kneeling beside him. "Letters you wrote to me over the years. I kept them all." Nathan picked up one of the letters, yellowed with time. This one is from the first time you traveled for work after we got married. You wrote about how the hotel bed was too big for just one person. Emily remembered the letter and all the others she had written in the first years of marriage whenever they separated temporarily because of work. It was a silly tradition that had started as a joke and transformed into an intimate form of communication. "Why did you bring them here?" she asked. "Because I want to write to you," said Nathan, his voice loaded with a vulnerability that touched her deeply. "I want to write about everything I couldn't say in these years of silence, about my fears, my regrets, my dreams for us, and I want you to write back." Emily picked up one of the old letters and reread her own words, written in a time of unconscious happiness. "My love," the letter said, "today I saw a sunset on Cape Cod and thought how perfect it would be if you were here to see it with me. I saved the image in my memory to share with you when I get home. Sometimes I think our love is so intense, it needs two people to contain all its strength." "We were so young," murmured Emily, laughing and crying at the same time. "So naive about how fragile love can be." "But we weren't naive about its strength," Nathan replied. "Look, after everything we've been through, all the lies and silences and hurts, we're still here. We still choose to stay." They spent the afternoon reading old letters and began a new tradition. Every night before sleep, they wrote a letter to each other. They weren't long or elaborate letters, sometimes just a few sentences about how the day had been, about something they had noticed in the other's behavior, about a memory that had resurfaced. But they were honest, vulnerable, and created a safe space to express feelings that were still difficult to verbalize directly. The letter Nathan wrote on the first night of this new tradition made Emily cry. "My Emily, today you helped me button my shirt because my fingers were particularly stubborn. You did it with such naturalness that I almost didn't notice, but I noticed the care in your movements, the patience, the total absence of pity or condescension. You helped me as an extension of love, not as an obligation of the disease. For the first time in years, I didn't feel ashamed of needing help. Thank you for giving me back my dignity." The letter Emily wrote in response was equally touching. "My Nathan, today I realized that you are memorizing my face. I saw you observing me during dinner with a different intensity, as if you were storing every detail in your memory. This scared me for a moment, because it made me think about the uncertain future we face. But then I realized that this is exactly what we should do. Memorize every good moment, every gesture of affection, every instant of connection. If time is limited, let's make every second count." It was through these letters that they began to plan the future. Not an idealized future, where the disease would magically disappear, but a real future where it would be present and would be faced together. They talked about adapting the house to facilitate Nathan's mobility when necessary, about the possibility of Emily reducing her workload to have more time together, about how they wanted their last years as a couple to be. And it was in one of these written conversations that the idea emerged that would change everything. Recording the complete music that Nathan had composed during the years of separation, transforming it into a symphony that would tell the story of their love, the initial happiness, the painful separation, and the courageous reunion. It would be a legacy, a way to immortalize what they had lived together. 1 year after the reunion in the greenhouse, Emily woke on a spring morning with a crystalline certainty about what she wanted to do. Nathan was still sleeping beside her, breathing softly, one hand resting on his chest in an intimacy reconquered inch by inch over the months. The disease had progressed. He now needed more time to execute simple tasks, and there were days when mental confusion left him frustrated and scared. But there were also glorious days when they seemed to have not only recovered the lost love, but discovered a deeper and more resilient version of it. Emily carefully got up so as not to wake him and walked to the greenhouse, where they had spent so many hours working together on the symphony that told their story. The music sheets were organized on a special table that Nathan had commissioned, each movement of the composition representing a phase of their relationship. The first movement was pure joy, all melodies dancing together in perfect harmony. The second was discordant, full of abrupt pauses and notes that clashed with each other. The third was slow and melancholic, like a whispered prayer. And the fourth, which they had finalized just the week before, was a unique fusion of all the previous melodies, acknowledging both the pain and the joy, both the separation and the reunion. But Emily had woken with the perception that something was still missing, a fifth movement, a final coda that she herself needed to write. She sat at the piano and began to play, letting feelings flow through her fingers without censorship or planning. What emerged was a completely new melody, but one that incorporated elements of everything they had created together over the years. It was a music about choices, about choosing to love even when love is difficult, about choosing to stay even when leaving would be easier, about choosing hope even when the future is uncertain. "It's beautiful," said Nathan's voice behind. Her Emily turned and saw him standing at the entrance of the greenhouse, still in his pajamas, observing her with that expression of total fascination that had been his trademark since the first day they met. His movements were slower in the morning, but his eyes shone with the same intensity as always. "It's for you," she said, standing up to embrace him. "For us. It's about all the choices we've made and continue to make every day." Nathan approached the piano and began to play with her, his fingers finding perfect harmonies for the melody she had created. Even with the tremor that affected his hands, even with the coordination no longer being the same as before, the music they made together continued to be magical. "Emily," he said, stopping playing for a moment, "I want to marry you again." She laughed, thinking he was making a romantic joke. "We're already married, love." "No," said Nathan, his expression serious and determined. "We got married when we were different people, when we thought that love was easy and that we would always have infinite time. I want to marry you knowing exactly who we are now, with our scars and limitations and all the baggage we carry. I want to choose you again, consciously, completely." Emily felt tears forming in her eyes. The idea was simultaneously simple and profound, and it made perfect sense. How do you imagine this ceremony? Small, intimate, just a few people who really matter, here in the greenhouse, surrounded by the plants we've cared for together. And our symphony playing in the background, recorded by the Boston Symphony Orchestra, as we always dreamed. Nathan took her hands in his. "And I want you to wear the dress you want, not what others expect. And I want to write my own vows, talking about everything we've learned." The idea quickly transformed into reality. Emily discovered there were very few people who really mattered to them. Some close family members, 2 or 3 true friends, Mrs. Martinez, who had taken care of the mansion all these years and had become part of the family. The symphony orchestra was moved by the story behind the music and agreed to record it as a wedding present. To her surprise, Emily decided to invite Jessica, not as an attempt at dramatic redemption, but as an acknowledgement that she too was part of their story, and that true forgiveness included the ability to transform pain into wisdom. Jessica arrived on the morning of the ceremony, bringing an unusual gift, a painting she had made showing the mansion's greenhouse in different seasons of the year. "It's about growth," she explained to Emily, "about how things can die in winter and be reborn in spring. You taught me that." The ceremony happened on a golden October afternoon, exactly 3 years after the night when everything had collapsed. Emily wore a simple white silk dress that she had chosen only because it made her feel beautiful and comfortable. Nathan wore a navy blue suit that enhanced his eyes and managed to remain steady throughout the entire ceremony, despite the tremor in his hands. The vows they wrote were masterpieces of emotional honesty. Emily spoke about learning that loving someone means choosing them every day, especially on the difficult days. Nathan spoke about discovering that vulnerability isn't weakness, but rather the courage to show oneself completely to another person. "I choose you," said Emily, looking directly into his eyes, "not despite everything we've been through, but because of everything we've been through. Because you taught me that true love isn't about avoiding storms together, but about learning to dance in the rain." "I choose you," Nathan replied, his voice firm despite the emotion. "Every day in all versions of you I don't yet know, in all challenges we haven't yet faced. I choose to build a home with you not in a place, but in the courage to be completely honest with each other. When they kissed to seal the new vows, the symphony they had composed together began to play on the greenhouse's sound system. Emily closed her eyes and allowed herself to fully feel the moment, the familiar taste of Nathan's lips, the perfume of the orchids blooming around them, the sound of her own music telling the story of their resurrected love. That night, after all the guests had left and they were alone in the candle-lit greenhouse, Emily finally did something she had planned for months. Slowly, looking into Nathan's eyes, she began to remove her wedding dress, not for urgent seduction or desperate passion, but as a ritual of total surrender, a declaration that her body was a gift she chose to give freely, without fear, without reservations. Nathan observed her with tears in his eyes, understanding that this moment wasn't about physical desire, though it was present, but about an intimacy that transcended the corporeal. It was about two people who had chosen to show themselves completely vulnerable to each other, scars and all. "You are beautiful," he whispered. "More beautiful than on the day we met, because now I see not only your beauty but your strength." They made love that night like two people who had learned that each moment of connection is a gift, not a right. Like two people who knew that time is finite, but that love, when it is true and conscious, has the power to transform even the most painful experiences into something sacred. Years later, when Nathan's symptoms became more severe and Emily officially became his caregiver, she kept a photo of that second wedding ceremony on her bedside table. On the most difficult days, when he didn't recognize her or when frustration with the disease left them irritated, she would look at the photo and remember the vows they had made, to choose each other every day, especially on the impossible days. And when Nathan died, 6 years after the reunion in the greenhouse, Emily didn't feel she had lost the love of her life. She felt she had fully lived the love of her life in all its complexities and challenges, and that this was a rare and precious gift that not all people have the courage